And you know, as former President Bush said, the strategery here is going to be really fascinating. You know, in the past, I'll just be real, just kind of talking shop here. When you had the same party controlling both the House and the Senate, any bills that the majority party opposed, it was easy to kill them or to run out of time. You used to get that a lot. You know, they'd sit in the House side for a while, they'd hold them, get them over to the Senate, and then it made it easier to say in the Senate, well, we ran out of time, just couldn't get to it. So the nuances here are fascinating, and like it has been commented on, we'll be deciding a lot of this strategy, you know, when we start, once we know how it's all going to parse out. You know, one of the realities is, as was mentioned, a lot of these bills may come out of the House just like that. And committee, that gets them over to the Senate. You know, if you've had a bill in the Senate for 6 weeks, it's kind of hard to say you ran out of time. So that changes, you know. A lot of folks on certain issues here, the last backstop for them is going to be the Senate. You know, it depends on what side of these issues you're on. So everything has changed. And I was telling Linda, you know, you're going to have to go through your Rolodex, tear up all the old cards. You know, everything is going to be different. The strategy has been the same for quite a few years. Individuals come and go, but the dynamics of control of the chambers was the same. And so everybody's kind of starting over from scratch. And I think that comment was correct. I don't think the Republicans really have a clue yet. It's one of those things, be careful what you wish for. So we'll see how it helps. And I'll be as surprised as the rest of you. A lot of that isn't communicated just because we're Republicans. In the Senate side, I read it in the paper when you get it.
Yeah. Did anybody want to pass up some questions, or we can take them? Or we can just take them. Okay. Yeah. Before we go to specific questions, I just wanted to mention about registering as a lobbyist or speaking for a group or whatever. Now, the league, we have specific rules with our members that you don't speak for the league unless you've been authorized to speak for the league, and each league member who is speaking has to sign up with the Secretary of State's office. It is free. It's sos.state.nm.us. You can download the form and so on. And we really want to make sure that whoever speaks for us is working from our positions that we basically come to after much study and concurrence with members around the state. And, you know, it's very carefully worded, so we do not let people speak for the league unless they are authorized to do so. Now, other groups may be much less formal than that, but just as a, you know, this is common courtesy, but make sure that you're authorized to speak for a group before you go ahead and do that. Now, you know, a lot of people want to speak as individuals about different matters, and that's fine. It's just be very careful if you're saying that you're speaking for that group, because you may be giving the wrong message. You know, that might be not the priority for this session, and who knows, you know, exactly what, you know, the organization wants. So they really want to make sure, most organizations want to make sure that you're an authorized spokesperson. But again, the registration, if you're unpaid lobbyist, is free with the Secretary of State's office, sos.state.nm.us, and then the authorizing agency needs to sign off that you are authorized. If you are paid,
the links for all those are also on our website.
Yeah, we have the links on our website, which again is LWV, League of Women Voters, NM, LWVNM.org.
And if you're just speaking for yourself, you do not have to register.
Right, and it's only $25 even if you're one of the suits who has, you know, we call them suits, you know, the people with the alligator boots and the blue suits. They only have to pay $25 too. So it doesn't cost much, but it really helps, I think, the legislators to be able to look and see who's authorized to speak for a group. The other thing, just before we go to the questions that I wanted to mention, everybody was talking about how improved the nmlegis.gov, nmlegis.gov website is. It is phenomenal, but one of the things I want to thank Senator Wirth especially for is that he is posting revised agendas on the website too. So, you know, he was talking about, Linda was talking about, you know, having to be there within an hour. One of the things that's been most helpful, and I'd encourage all legislators to do this, is if if they know that something's not going to be heard, please inform the public. Because even if you're watching a webcast and you're expecting your bill to come up, you don't want to wait 6 hours for something to come up only to find out, oh, they decided to do it on Friday instead. It's really a courtesy to the public, and we do want people to participate. Anyway, beyond that, let's take some questions. Okay. Yes.
Hi.
Will you say your name, please?
Yes, hi, I'm Trish Lopez. I actually met Linda and Pierre, Senator Wirth, through a couple of events in Los Angeles. But I'm just a citizen, so I'm just coming to learn. Senator Brewer, you had said something that I was curious about. I wrote it down on my phone. Oh, currently on contracts, do people not have access to see it? Do citizens not have access to see state contracts? You were saying that you were hoping that would become something like part of the website. You have to do an info request as it stands now?
Well, you do, and there's some really interesting nuances to that. Former Senator Diane Dennis and I think it was Representative Park at the time, made an effort to get state contracts online. And there were some issues about proprietary information. Some of these contracts are quite long. So I think what we ended up with is like the purchase orders, the after the fact documents. But the thing that I was getting pushback on is people want to understand better the process. Who makes a decision as to how you get the contract? And what was the scoring sheet? They get bids and then they score all these things. So that's what I would like to do, is take it, and has been mentioned, sometimes you don't swallow the whole apple at once. You take little steps. Well, we've made some progress with the contracts. Last session, I got a bill passed that would, the sole source emergency procurements, there was some mischief with that. Certain people were getting these. They didn't go out to bid because they were determined to be emergency or sole source. So we passed some legislation, and Cliff Reese was here a minute ago. He did a lot of the heavy lifting on that. That if it's a sole source, you still need to post it up publicly for 90 days. Somebody may tell you there's only one guy in the state that can do that, but there may be 6 other companies. Had they known, they would have an opportunity to bid on it. So we're opening that process up. But right now, unless you file an IFRA, you're not going to get that contract document, and that's what we have to fix. And the thing about technology, back in the day, our founding fathers intended for all the books. Jefferson said the books of government will be open like a merchant's books. Government got so big you couldn't do that. Technology now has afforded us an opportunity for you to participate in the process through the website. It's afforded us an opportunity to get you information so you can participate, so you can get involved in policy decisions, so you can come up here and talk to us, having seen some of this and done some research, and be able to engage us in that conversation. That's the whole point of all that. And it takes little steps. About the cameras in the Senate, you're going to love this. There was a vote on the Senate floor to allow cameras. I think it was on the floor of the committee rooms. On the floor, they took a vote. There were only 3 legislators that voted to do that, because the leadership hates that sort of thing. I'll say it. The leadership hates it. There were 3 guys that voted for it. Senator Mark Boitano, Senator Wirth, and Senator Root. That's how far we've come in a relatively short period of time, but we're swimming upstream even today on some of this stuff. So thank you for the questions.
It was very gratifying, by the way, to hear you guys say that it's frustrating even for you as legislators. You're like, there's this perfect bill that was so served in Mexico, and it's gratifying because that's how citizens obviously feel many times.
Yeah.
Just one thing really quick, a fun story on that. So we did this vote, and it was, kind of people were looking at us going, what are you guys raiders? and then we made the mistake of getting up really early in the morning and getting on the radio. And so a similar comment was made about the leadership, and all of a sudden we both kind of walked into the chamber. Yikes!
I don't know when to shut up sometimes. I think I made it
was all good.
Yes.
Following
Karen Hellmeyer.
on what Linda said, can you talk about the efficacy of mass email campaigns and how groups can improve that? Having been a victim of some.
Let me just jump on that. I had put an asterisk by that when Linda was talking about that. One thing that, the first thing I do when I get an email is I look to see if it was sent from you on your behalf from somebody else. because I can get hundreds of the same email. Well, you get diminishing returns on that. The first thing I do is look to see if this is something that somebody sat down and typed up to me. I will read every one of those, and if I'm able to and can, I will respond at least that I received it and thank you. But 400 mass emails sent on behalf of you from so-and-so, such and such, it may, I don't know if those that went out to Representative Park just wore him down, I don't know, maybe they were those, but I tend to look at, if somebody takes the time to communicate with me like that, I'm going to take the time, to get back with them. A lot of times I call them. It's just quicker sometimes than me doing the hunt and peck. But so you're not going to wear, a lot of guys aren't going to say, I give up, please stop. More often than not, I think you get some negative, I think the end result of a lot of that is negative.
So we had an issue when I was in the House, because one of the teachers unions went and they were using their teacher lists to access member names that were sending emails, and the members of the union didn't even know that the emails were going. And so all of a sudden we had this massive dump. And so what I like to do when I get a massive dump is come up with my response, and then I bang back the response. If you're gonna dump me, I'll dump you right back. And it's a communication, so people really appreciate. My God, this guy actually responded to me. Well, I started responding to all these teachers. I'm getting these emails going, what are you talking about?
Oh, wow.
And needless to say, yeah. So it's really, Think New Mexico does this a bunch, and again, it's not targeted. It's just, we're going to dump. Fred sends a notice to all the members, and all of a sudden I get all these emails. Generally, lots of constituents of mine, so I do respond with a general email, but it's not as effective as my guess is that when Linda had 400 nurses talking to Al, they were actual people that were sending their own emails versus these robo.
And that's what I tell my clients, do not do a standard letter or standard paragraph, make it personal. And actually some of the nurses were kind of got off track and, made threatening remarks like, I'm never going to vote for you again if you do that sort of thing. So
It's personal.
Yeah, personal,
And that's a good distinction.
Yeah.
You shouldn't make it personal.
Right, and I try to discourage that. You don't threaten legislators for, doing their job even if they disagree with you.
Yeah, and I don't. The email that says "I'm watching you" is not. Good for you. Good for you.
Please.
Notions of corruption have changed over time. I've read that at one time in California it was illegal to lobby a legislator. What would you think of making that illegal now, especially given changes in technology that, as you say, make it easier for people to communicate directly?
My guess would be you probably run into a First Amendment issue. I think that people, our whole system is based on people being able to not just, because again, communicating via email is one thing, but face-to-face is way more effective. And I think the point Linda made is something that it's good for me to think about too, is that, the lobbyist often is representing a whole constituency of people that just can't be here. Mm-hmm. And so, again, I agree with what, kind of what Sanders said about the lobbyists, and you learn pretty quick who's doing it the right way and who's not. And again, we don't have, it's a little different now. As a committee chair, I've actually got staff that helps with the committee, and that's a new thing. It used to just be, everyone says, well, I need to contact your staff person, and that's like the guy I look at in the mirror every morning. Yeah, look at him. So it's an interesting. I think in terms of the communication piece of it, I would have a hard time saying to someone, that you have some kind of ban on. I don't think you could do a ban on lobbyists. I think you'd run into a First Amendment. So I'm curious what California did on that, but they do. Let me say, they've got a lot of influence in this building.
That's all hand over here. Thank you. Introduce yourself, please.
Diane Goodman, and I wanted to let you know that legislative site is fantastic. So I've discovered a lot of things in my research, so I appreciate that very much. But I did want to let you know, I do try to do public comments for one committee in particular, not related to legislature. Senator Wirth is aware of it. And what I'm finding is I'm doing public comment and bringing a camera in, and what they're doing is they're selectively removing part of they record it too, but they're selectively removing the part with the public comments. They've now, in their committee meeting minutes, are excluding the director's report, because now all of a sudden that this is getting exposed and we're trying to educate the public on it, they're all of a sudden going into this, I call it a run and hide tactic. So my question, pardon me?
Is it the PRC?
No, it's Construction Industry Division and the Commission. And it's on the website. I've got a website now that I've created because I'm like, okay, well, you don't want to do it, then I'll do it. But my point is, how do we deal with that effectively? Because we need to address the issues that I know are going on, but they're not they're trying to suppress the voice rather than deal with the truth.
That sounds like a bill for Senator Sunshine.
The transparency thing, I loved it when we first started having the discussion. It's like being a little bit pregnant. You know, either it's going to be transparent or it's not going to be transparent.
Right.
And like, for instance, the thing that frustrates me, a lot of the committee votes are not posted up.
Right.
And to me, that's huge. I mean, for what you all are talking about, the reason we're here today, to start tracking these things. You can go on the legislative website, see how your bill did in the committee. Yeah, it passed, but there may or may not be a breakdown on the vote. And the other thing that troubles me is in the committees, when somebody shows up with a camera, the protocol that's not always followed is to ask the ranking member of the other party, and I'm ranking member of Rules, are you okay with the camera? You know, I mean, I don't understand why somebody would need permission to do that, and who am I to make that decision with the, you know, that's just not right. As long as they're not, you know, in our face with the darn thing, and if the Senate attendants are telling them, you know, if you could stand here and here, that's fine. So, yeah, to your point, the fact that people can edit these things and couch what actually becomes available to the public is very problematic, and we have some control over what we do in the legislature. We're not all the way there yet. As far as the PRC and some
CIC, Construction Industry
construction
Commission.
industries,
And let me just add, there is transparency in retreating and hiding, because in the past they provided it and it's on the website, but now they've stopped providing it. So it does actually become transparent that they're trying to not be transparent. So I just want to let you know, it's working, so thank you very much for that legislative website, it's
Yeah.
fantastic.
As far as I know, none of the webcasts are being archived from the hearings.
that's absolutely.
Unless the governor's office is also doing the webcast, and on the governor's website, you can go back and review, you know, basically the tapes. One of the bills that I understand is coming up, but it's going to take a lot of money if this actually passes, and the money is disappearing quickly with the lower oil prices, but is to try to archive the webcast so that people can come, you know, later on and review what happened in a session. But anyway, I think, you know, the webcasts are great, but you've got to be there real time to watch them. So anyway, we have a question back here. Yes.
I'm Derek Werner. I'm interested in the distinction between a public advocacy focus for a lobbying effort versus a commercial focus or a business focus, especially given the changes over the last few years in the sort of funding environment for political campaigns. And this may go to some of the things that Senator Rue has mentioned about transparency. Maybe, you know, transparency legislation looks like maybe the last option that we have, given the Supreme Court's positions on these issues. And I just wonder about that distinction, and maybe this is a question mostly
Yeah.
for Ms. Siegel.
It is an important distinction, I think, and to me, it's probably all about money. Because if you go on the website, the Secretary of State's website, you can look at every lobbyist contributions. And those contributions that funnel through them to go to, from corporations that go through that lobbyist.
And that's on
And
NM Legis?
That is on
No,
the
SOS.
the Secretary of
SOS.
State's
SOS, that's
website,
right.
campaign finances.
Okay.
And I try to make contributions to legislators of both parties. And as Patsy Madrid said in a debate a number of years ago when she was running against Heather Wilson, lobbyist money is all about just having access. And in reality, that is how lobbyists see it, that if I give a little money to this legislator, or I give a lot of money to this legislator, I'm going to at least have access. But I think that's where you see the distinction between the more public-oriented lobbyists like me, who represents a lot of different associations, and the corporate lobbyists who represent gas and oil and insurance and all the big money things. And the reality is, when I go up against the insurance lobby for the nurses who want to make sure that a nurse practitioner is getting reimbursed at the same level as a physician for the same service, it's hard. Because you go into committees like the Corporation Committee, which we see as an industry-controlled committee. If it's an insurance issue, I'm going to lose probably. And so I have to figure out other ways, and I have to, work with the insurance companies, which is not necessarily a bad thing, to get a compromise before I even go into the committee. But I might not have to do that if I were the powerful insurance lobby. I don't know if that answers your
Can I
question.
say one more thing though, because I think it's really important, and you've touched on it. We're one of now only 4 states that doesn't require disclosure of donors to the new world that we have, the independent expenditure committees, the C3s that engage and express advocacy. I've had that bill the last 2 sessions. It's passed the Senate unanimously. We're bringing it back, but for all the same reasons. So what's happening now is you've got all this dark money. And if you run a business and your competitor is playing the game in a way that's not transparent, you can really get hurt. And so we're trying to turn the lights on for that whole piece, because Citizens United has fundamentally changed the game when it comes to money in politics. And we're seeing things here that just were unheard of in terms of the amount of money. And then I think having these outside groups that come in and some of them do not have to disclose under the current rules.
And to that earlier point, this isn't, it's one of those things, you can talk about broader campaign finance reform, but this is a case where not necessarily dealing with the limits of anything, but just making it more transparent. Just disclose who they are. And then these things kind of have a way of taking care of themselves, and people will ask questions, and you all may understand better. When you see something you don't quite understand, if you go back and follow the money kind of thing a little bit, sometimes these things begin to make a little more sense. But you should be able to see that, and Senator Wirth is, every session, he's been the champion for that process, more open
Yeah,
disclosure, full
this
disclosure.
is absolutely critical to our democracy, this campaign
And I know
finance
Lee, this is a
disclosure.
position Lee is taking.
Yes, and we work with Common Cause and other partners because this is so important, and we also need an independent ethics commission, and we'll be working on that one too. Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Identify yourself.
Yes, I'm Chris Michels, and as Senator Wirth knows, a major concern of mine currently is police reform. And a couple of comments and then a question. First off, Senator Rue, I really appreciate your position on transparency. I think one of the major issues I have right now working police is the police policies are not transparent.
And I heard your comments at committee, you'll recall a couple weeks ago you made.
Yes, and that's huge. That is really huge. You mean like the Santa Fe Police Force, the policy is not in line, the sheriff is not in line. Some places that are in line, which I think people don't realize, Albuquerque in many ways is leading. I mean, Albuquerque's policies have been in line for a long time. So this, I believe, there's very little excuse for the police policies with the current web technology not to put their policies in line. It's hard getting policies from some of these police, and it shouldn't be. So that would be very helpful. The other thing I would note is that I'm a nominal Democrat, so I started out having a lot of issues with Governor Johnson. I ended up voting for Governor Johnson on transparency. That son of a gun was transparent. And when Richardson came in, I found out the doors that used to be open closed. And it was just terrible for me, just trying to get information at that point. So I agree, it's not a party thing, it's a transparency thing, and both parties, I think, need to work on transparency. I
Funny
really
thing
applaud
about
you.
transparency, and I made this comment publicly, I could say sometimes I talk when I should shut up. But I made the comment once that, transparency is a really good idea when you're running for office. Sometimes after you get elected, we see that a lot.
Also, I'm sorry, I had to comment, I hadn't quite finished.
Okay,
My
please
question,
lots of other questions.
my question was going to be, I'm very troubled by your comment on open carry. I mean, I actually have friends who are against open carry, and I say maybe to be against open carry, maybe you have to carry, because I think when people carry guns and they're against people that aren't carrying guns, there's an unfortunate tipping of the balance just simply on the side of those who are armed. I've actually suggested to people who aren't armed they should carry guns, but that to me is, I don't think you can avoid being influenced when somebody comes in packing heavy artillery.
It influenced me.
Huh?
And when that individual showed up in committee, later, if I can jump in real quick, I mentioned to one of the leadership who was in the committee, and that the individual was in that committee then, and, we called in some of the security just to be present. The man had a right to be there, I get that, but you're right. So all of a sudden, all of us on the committee are thinking about that and not other things that we should be thinking
exactly.
about.
Right.
It is a little bit.
Very troubling.
Yeah, I sure hope that the legislature some years stops having guns allowed. Yes. Okay, okay, let's see, who had to say? Oh, Jared, why don't you go?
Jared Applewhite. I have a question for the two senators, which is, does a citizen get more traction when they buttonhole you if they're speaking as an individual about an issue that concerns them, or if they're going to the trouble to register as a lobbyist with Common Cause or the League, if it's an issue that those organizations are in alignment with and would permit them to lobby?
I have to speak for myself. I don't really know, because I don't know who's registered and who hasn't. So first of all, someone stands up and said, they should say, I'm a registered lobbyist on behalf, but a lot of people don't do that. Generally, if it's Common Cause or the League, groups that I always work with, we may not always agree on issues. I'm certainly going to listen if they're there on behalf of the group. But likewise, if someone comes and says, Peter, I'm a registered voter in your district, and this is my issue, it's going to get my attention big time. So again, I don't know that there's really that much of a distinction there with that particular hypothetical, for me anyway, and I don't know, Senator Rudy.
I never asked the question, I never know. I always appreciate it when people, I'll ask, identify yourself please, and do you represent a group? That's like getting back to the email thing, that's kind of where the rubber meets the road. I mean, if somebody goes to the trouble of coming up here on their own and asks to, come into my office and sit down, I want to hear what that person really has to say. Because they're probably speaking from the heart, as everybody is. But, if they went to the trouble on their own to come up there and do that, or type me an email, that just resonates with me. We had an idea for some legislation several years ago that I thought was really great, that all contract lobbyists be required to wear like a NASCAR jumpsuit with the logo of all the different corporate sponsors. And maybe make it orange so you can spot them.
I'll be looking for that bill.
I suspect that is the case. It's more, occasionally a group or an organization will approach citizens that are friendly to it and say, would you be willing to register as a lobbyist for us to speak on that topic? And from that standpoint, I was wondering whether those voices are more effective, and I hear you saying not really.
Well, it depends. Like, for instance, if we have, in corporate transportation, if we had a bill Well, or education, whatever the case may be. If somebody stands up and speaks for the teachers, you know, whether it be the union or teacher association or something, that has a lot of impact, you know. And same thing in the business community, when the Chamber of Commerce gets up, or the Association of Contractors, you know, when they stand up and a lobbyist is speaking for that association that's directly impacted by a particular piece of legislation, yeah, you know, that has some stroke and sway. And then on other issues, really more of the personal stories, you know, and a lot of the issues that Linda deals with, people that are impacted by healthcare and stuff. You know, I really appreciate hearing from somebody who's directly impacted by that. You know, the healthcare providers, you know, I pretty much can quote text and verse what their position is on things. But I like to hear from people that are impacted by these things, that, you know, so it depends on what the issue is.
Yeah, two of the most effective groups in this building are the trial lawyers and the doctors. And it's very interesting when you get some of these votes and all of a sudden I've got, you know, my friend, the doctor who I've known for, or my doctor, you know, or lawyers, I mean, again, calling me up and just, you know, Peter, this is what this really means to us. And they're, you know, clearly it's been, and maybe that's not appropriate. I don't know, maybe they need to register to be able to do that. I just don't look at it that way.
No, I'm saying, I think different organizations have different rules,
Yeah.
but it's just a courtesy to make sure that you're authorized to speak for that organization.
I'm Jade Gordon, and you mentioned sometimes the unavailability of legislators' voting records. And I've been going to a website called votesmart.org, and I wonder, do you think that's a legitimate, I mean, sometimes I think, oh my God, you know, what if they're not correctly reporting this?
Yeah, and I don't think we actually report our votes there. That they're figuring it. They're getting a dump, a download, and then also a Rio Grande Foundation. Paul Gessing's got another website.
They had a great one years ago, the Rio Grande Foundation. I don't know if they're going to put it up again or not, but boy, you could type in a search word, and then it would pull up not just my floor votes, but my committee votes. Boy, and I would use that all the time. Trying to go back and see what my colleagues were doing. Hypocrite, you know. So yeah, you got to. But we have one for the state legislative website, but there are some others out there, and I've gone to that one too, and I haven't delved too deep into it. But I love those search engines. That's the great thing about that. You can type in keywords and be very specific about what you're looking for.
Yeah, and speaking of keywords, if you're looking for legislation on a topic, you can also put in, you know, that keyword, whether it's education or environment or natural resources or whatever, and you can find out all the bills that have those words in, you know, in their text. And then you can also move from there to the committees. But while you're on the bills and actually reading the text of the bills, it's also really helpful to look at the fiscal impact reports, because not only do they have what the bill implementation is projected to cost, but they also have analysis by you know, people who work for the Legislative Council Service, and you know, they look at both sides of the issues, or several sides, many aspects. You can also ask, you can send something to correct the FIR, the fiscal impact report, too. If your organization feels not being adequately represented, the analysts can put that in there, and so the legislator can read, you know, what your organization says about that bill. So anyway, the website is fabulous.
That is a real good point. There's some individuals that have introduced bills that have been this thick, and it'll blow your mind, and you're reading the legalese, bill drafting kind of language. But if you go to that FIR, and we'll do this too, kind of like the old joke in Congress, yeah, I voted for it, and then I'll read it later. But it's hard to get through some of those bills sometimes. If you really want to get to the crux of what it is, we call it the FIR, Fiscal Impact Report. Go to that, and you can pretty quickly, and they give you both sides, the fiscal impact. It's a real quick, usually pretty fair analysis of a particular bill.
So, and the other thing that's important, if you're running legislation that has a fiscal impact, you really need to understand what that means. Because it means you're headed into the Finance Committee. And what my good friend Max Call told me when I first showed up is, you can have the best policy idea in the world, and if there's no money, it's not happening. And so there's a whole bunch of policy that ends up, you think you need to go through the Public Affairs Committee and Judiciary and Conservation, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in the middle of the budget process, stuck in Senate Finance to get out because you've got a fiscal impact. So,
Regardless of the merits of your
Yes.
bill,
Right.
it's just a money thing.
Okay, I'm gonna take one from this side unless there are no, well,
Sorry, I know already asked, I'll wait.
wait a second, yeah, and wait until everybody has a chance. Okay, why don't you go?
Hi, I'm Janet Goffin. I have a question about the blast out of committee process, particularly since the balance of power shifted in the House, and I think Senator Wirth alluded to the fact that certain social policy bills may end up passing the House, passing out of committee, and may end up in Senate committees. Could you talk about the implications and maybe clarify, if it's possible to clarify, what
yeah,
that
no,
might mean?
I'm happy to do it, and I think, so what folks understand, just so people know, is under the rules, if you have 22 votes on the floor of the Senate, you can do pretty much anything. You can just ignore the committee process, you can roll over your leadership, and you can stand up and make a motion that a certain bill that's been stuck in a committee be pulled directly to the floor and be made the next order of business. It hasn't happened in the Senate for 10 years. It was my first year when I was in the House, and it was a parental notification abortion bill. And I always remember because we were messing around with the cockfighting ban, and so we couldn't get that heard in the Senate, but we knew we had the votes on the floor, and this is the challenge. There are issues where the votes are on the floor to pass something, but the votes are not in the committee to get it to the floor. And so there's not been a blast in 10 years in the Senate. I think the first time it happened in the House in a very long time was when Speaker Lujan was there on the driver's license bill. And it was just a horrific, 9-hour battle when Democrats joined the Republicans and pulled that bill out of committee. We try, and one thing I can say about the Senate, and I've been involved in discussions in the 6 years I've been in there with members on both sides about, the blast option, and we've really avoided that because, again, we work together, and even though the Republicans are in the minority, the reality is that there is an ongoing discussion between both sides, and that discussion is are we going to uphold the integrity of this chamber or turn this into a free-for-all? And if it turns into a free-for-all with 22 votes, there's a lot of things they don't like that might come screaming out. And so we've managed to avoid that. I think that you're depending on your issue, you're right to be concerned about that, because the difference now, and when it happened 10 years ago in the Senate, of course the bill went right over to the House and went into a committee and didn't come out. So the difference now is that you've got one chamber that's in a position to be the stop on some of these things, and so.
And that's a really good point, and Peter touched on this too, is that there are some things that we could do or could be done to us, depending on but it doesn't happen. And it's one of those things that I could talk all day and it'd be hard for me to articulate how, let me just put it this way, there have been things in the past where certain people have made comments or kind of made associations about about the Senate this, or somebody's attacked a member. And to me, the thing that I'll always remember is how the Senate will just stop, and leadership will stand up and call that out to the fact that you don't disrespect the integrity of this body. Because if you start trying to do that to us, we will come together. And it's just hard for me to articulate. It's just one of those things that people don't understand if you haven't been there. But when push comes to shove, we will stand for the integrity of that. I'm speaking of the Senate, I don't know about the House, but when push comes to shove, and there's some things that we could do but aren't done just because of the respect and consideration we have to each other. So anyway, I'll just leave it.
Call Washington immediately.
I've been involved in many, before 10 years ago, those blast attempts and successful blasts around abortion and around gay and lesbian rights. And it is so much better now that the process of the committees is being followed. And I know it's hard for the minority party when there's a bill that's been sitting in the committee for many, many weeks, never getting a hearing as part of the strategy to kill those kind of bills from our perspective. But it was brutal in the days when we knew that an anti-gay rights bill was going to be blasted or was blasted out of the committee.
Now, having said that, though, the dynamic has changed.
It has.
So now, that's a good point, because this will be thrown out there sometimes, maybe as a veiled threat or whatever the
Yeah.
case may be, but you're going to hear more discussion about that.
Hi, my name is Jean Logston. I live in Albuquerque. I'm a relatively new League Midland. I've never lobbied anything, but I'm an interested citizen. So I've got some basic questions about how do we get information and with enough advance notice about what's going on if we're not going to be kind of an insider. We're not in the loop. I have the Albuquerque Journal as my source of information. And
Oh, dear.
Just for what the-
so
Mexicans.
and so what I'd like to know, are there some blogs or other sources of information that I could get, become familiar with? Like, I know Joe Monahan has a blog. Are there others? A way to just be better informed as a citizen.
I think, isn't on the, where's there a list? Is it on the website, the legislative website, where it lists some of the blogs? I've seen the list, but that's a really good point. And, you'd want to look at several of them. There's some of these all have their bias and slants, but if you read those things, and I do, you just kind of get you kind of get into some of the stuff that you don't normally see in the paper. But you want to get the balanced thing. You want to, do both sides of these, look at a couple different blogs. Because then you'll begin to really understand some of the insider baseball a little better than you would otherwise just getting it out of the journal.
Yeah, one other thing, let me just suggest, and again, this is something that I use, some members do, I don't think Senator Root uses this, but Twitter is becoming extraordinary, and you don't have to tweet to follow who you want to follow. You can set up an account, and if you follow @Senator Wirth, I really keep an ongoing dialogue of what's going on, if there's certain bills that I've got, here's the bill, the hearing's going to be this time, and also, it allows you to follow a group of legislators on both sides, and we all do it, and then you do really get a feel for the different kind of ins and outs, another way to do that, and that's on real time, but also on league stuff, and Meredith, I don't know, you guys,
send out stuff.
yeah, you guys
Well, we do more constant contact, things we don't,
email blast.
we're not tweet types, but, or some of us aren't. Some of us are too old. But anyway, on the nmlegis.gov, there's a little, one of the Twitter birds, right? And you don't have to be a Twitter user in order to get the tweets. You can just sign up to get, as Wirth was saying, some of his tweets without being bombarded by everybody's tweets about the same topic. Yes, why don't you go?
Barbara Goodwin, and this is for Linda. For organizations looking to hire a lobbyist, how do they identify the best lobbyist for them? And also, are some lobbyists more received better by Republicans and Democrats, or Democrats than Republicans?
Oh, those are great questions. I think if you're, depending on your type of organization, go on to the Secretary of State's website and go into the lobbyist index. And you can look at people and see who they represent. If you go into mine, you're going to see that I have healthcare providers, childcare providers, the homeless coalition, the school-based health clinics, Santa Fe Public School. And so you're going to see, okay, there's someone who has these interests. You go look at other...
He's not the guy you
Yeah, look at different lobbyists and see if they represent similar interests to yours. And then talk to people. I mean, all the lobbyists up here, we all know each other. We all work together or against each other at different times. So that's a good way. What was the second part of your question?
If some lobbyists are received better by Republicans.
Oh, yeah, sure. There are lobbyists who really focus on the Democrats. and they'll, talk to Republicans when they have to. And then there are the Republican lobbyists who kind of do the same thing. And it just depends on the individual. Now, if you had a Republican-controlled Senate, a Republican-controlled House, a Republican on the fourth floor, then you might want to hire the lobbyist who is really a big donor to the Republican legislators. So it does matter, but if you're a good lobbyist, regardless of what party you're part of, you are talking to both sides and respectful to both sides.
How do you find out that allegiance?
You really have to talk to people.
Yeah.
It's not something you're going to find on any website.
Well, and Barbara, you also can check in with your legislators.
Yeah.
I will tell you, I've had some of the most interesting moments were when environmental groups, especially when Martinez first came in. I think Senator Rue was on Senate Judiciary. There was a moment when all the oil and gas and industry was trying to roll back all the regulations, and the environmental groups hired Raymond Sanchez. Not typically, he didn't fit the mode, and it was a pretty unbelievable moment when Raymond Sanchez came in and he had cufflinks going and the whole thing. He sat down in front, and all of his friends, because he lobbies both sides, were looking and going, what in the world's going on? And all of a sudden, I think it was the Democrats all voted to kind of not kill the regulation, and the 4 Republicans were sitting over there going, wow. And so again, it's a very, depends on the issue, but you also, things, different folks for different issues, and I'm always happy, and I talk to lots of groups about kind of who might work, who might not, and again, something may work for me that doesn't, and the interesting thing, Senator Rue and I both have a little caucus of lobbyists that generally really don't work for us. So, you want to make sure you don't hire those people.
Sometimes it's a kill the messenger thing, but sometimes what will happen though, on some of these really key issues, you'll see some of these lobbyists partner up and work together. And you'll see that on a lot of issues. The lobbyists that tend to be more affiliated with Republican interests and causes that may be respected on both sides of the aisle will partner up with somebody that's more Democrat-oriented, that we all know, it's not a bad thing, but sometimes they'll tag team on these things, and they'll do it on an issue-to-issue basis. So you see a lot of that.
I just want to echo a word that I've heard from several times in several places: respect. I mean, it is amazingly respectful, and I think Peter started out saying this is not Congress. I think that, there's a lot of give and take, and hopefully everybody is not thinking of the partisan issues all the time and thinking about what's best for the state of New Mexico. So, you have to cut through the corporate interests to really look at what's good government.
Chris, over.
Okay, yes, why don't we go back?
Christopher Goulet, I represent the craft beer industry. We were informed this year about some unwritten rules, or some, like we talk about respect, I think it's a good question. There are some unwrittens out there about the way you do things in this room, in this building. And so one of them we found out we didn't know is you have a lobbyist one year, go get different lobbyists the next year. Or if you ran a bill with one senator and they were successful 2, 3, 4 years ago, there's a deference of going back to that senator. So how do you learn if you're new to this? Rules so that you don't come off looking like a Jackson.
So you end up drinking a lot of craft beer. It's interesting because you're learning every day, all 3 of us, different pieces of it. And to some extent, unfortunately, you learn by making the mistake. And so, again, I think it's a really good point. I really appreciate you bringing it up and kind of laying it out, because it's again, I would just say if Chris Goulet comes and says, Peter, here's this kind of challenge I've got, what should I do? Ask the question, assuming you realize it's a problem. And I certainly can help direct that, because I do think, you get For example, I had a bill, Representative-elect McQueen, who's brand new, had sent me an email, and I want to do all these things on eminent domain. And so I just look up my list of bills and shoot in the bill right back, and I tried it, didn't work, and I'm like, hey,
Give it a shot.
go for it, take it. But if he had just dropped that bill and someone else had been working on it, then you get into these weird things. And we had a situation come up in the Water Committee with a piece of legislation, and we couldn't quite figure out why certain people were all of a sudden opposed. Well, the members hadn't been approached in a way they felt they should have been approached on a piece of legislation, and so someone else is sponsoring it. So it's tricky, and sometimes you're just not, a very experienced lobbyist will make similar kinds of mistakes. So all I can say is just figure out channels where you can get a straight shoot in terms of an answer. And I don't know, Sandra, you got any?
I would just say, ask the same question of several people too, so you want to make sure that you get a little better perspective of broader base opinion.
Well, and there's this also kind of unwritten rule among the lobbyists that you don't go try to steal other people's clients. And when another lobbyist does that, we all find out and we get mad. If you lose a client because they weren't happy with you, that's fine, but someone to go try to steal somebody else's client, not good.
Yes.
Yeah, Paul Gibson, relatively new to Santa Fe, 2 years, and coming from Berkeley where I was pretty politically active, I'm finding that this isn't even a question. I'm stunned to see the camaraderie between you two after months of watching Washington and just wanting to cry. The sample size though is pretty small. Is it the end? Is it? I realize there's going to be some antagonism and where people just butt heads irrationally. I want to get more involved in this, and I'm encouraged by this. It just seems human and reasonable, and I'm wondering, how representative is it in reality?
Well, we've had some. It kind of depends on who you are as a person too. But I got a kick out of this. A couple elections ago, we had a couple fellows got elected and came up here and thought they were going to, tell the cow, how to eat the cabbage, and it happens, and they get their head handed to them pretty darn quick. And there's a way sometimes where these things self-correct. I'll tell you, it's a funny story. We had one newly elected House member a couple years ago brought a bill before Courts and Trans, and this individual was out there kind of making some kind of nasty statements about the process and this committee chair and this darn committee. So he sat down, presented his bill. As soon as he was done, there was a motion to table. And immediately, and this guy was still trying to figure out, and if you could have seen his face, and somebody said, now you need to get up and leave. He was crushed. And then he came back into the Senate a couple days later and sought out the wise counsel of Senator Wirth. And he sat down and explained to him, look, you can do this the right way or do it the wrong way. But to your point, we spend so much time together, and, if you're a person that just, the reason I keep coming back, I just love being up here and just being around the committee members and being on the floor. And again, it's hard to put into words. And I think a lot of us feel that way. If you really, peeled the layers of the onion back and got to it, I think a lot of us feel that way. We all feel very strongly about New Mexico. We all want to improve things for New Mexicans. We don't always agree on how to get there, but we have to work together. And there are just some people that are like people, and some people don't as much. I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah, I do want to say, I think this is so different from